Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Unique Harmony 7. Want us to document everything we do? Sure, let's jump right in. I recently read a post on here that reminded me of this little bit of malicious compliance from my last job. I worked as sales support in a small business where we provided a service to other businesses. Basically, we had account managers whose main job was to contact prospective new clients and get them signed up by offering to sell them certain supplies essential for their business at a better price than they currently got. Where I live, this is a common way to do this, and most small to medium-sized businesses who use these supplies have contracts with similar companies with similar practices. Once new companies are signed up, 90% of the actual account managing falls on sales support. The account managers call to check in and offer promotions, set initial custom prices, and handle complaints if sales support isn't able to resolve them. But 95% of their job is getting new accounts, and most sign up 20 to 30 new companies per month. Sales support is responsible for reading and answering the account manager's emails, the general inquiries emails, answering the phones, taking orders, order updates, product questions, compiling the account manager's sales reports for their daily meetings with management, liaising with the warehouse on order issues, rushes, delivery problems, processing payments, taking accounting inquiries, and ordering troubleshooting. We also created custom price comparisons for prospective customers where account managers send us lists of everything they've purchased in the last 3 months and we find our comparable products, look up costs, and calculate the best win-win prices. It's a lot. When I started, there were 2 sales support, including me, and 4 account managers. So we each handled the accounts of 2 account managers and equally split the rest of the accounting and operations duties. Neither of us ever took a proper break during the day, regularly came in early to get a head start on things, and we both were excellent multitaskers, often entering an order over the phone while also answering Skype questions from the warehouse about X order or Y order, or answering the 100 or so emails we regularly fielded from the various accounts we each were responsible for. The phones rang almost constantly, so it was a giant juggling act every day. After a year, I went on maternity leave and came back a year later. By then, they had expanded to 7 account managers but still only had 2 sales support. The workload had increased a lot, but they justified not having to hire more sales support by saying a lot of customers had moved their ordering online, so it was less work per account. Order entry was a decent part of the day, but with an average of 150 new accounts per month, and our policy against giving them online access for the first while as we got their custom price plans worked out, it was still a boatload of work. Also, only about 60% of orders were online, and the site was buggy and hard to navigate, so we'd often still spend time walking people through their online orders or fixing order mistakes. Here's where the malicious compliance comes in. After a particularly rough week, we had a meeting where the account managers asked if certain tasks of theirs that they disliked could be moved to sales support to help them free up time to get new accounts. New accounts are the #1 goal of management, so they thought that was a great idea. Me and the other sales support looked at each other with wide eyes, and I raised my hand and said, I honestly don't think we can do that. There was some back and forth, and eventually our newest manager, who wanted to impress the owners with his great ideas, says, well, maybe there are some ways you could increase efficiency with current tasks to free up some time to take this on. The brilliant idea was to have us log everything we did, every incoming and outgoing call, the length and reason, inbound and outbound emails, the internal calls and messaging with other departments, reports, everything. I tried not to laugh because I knew immediately how bad this was going to be, but we maliciously complied. After every call, I opened my spreadsheet and entered the time, length, reason for the call. The phone would continue to read, but since we had to be accurate with this, we often wouldn't be able to answer the next 1 to 2 calls, meaning we would then have to listen to the voicemail left by the customer, then call them back and wait on hold to get the purchaser again, making each call eat up much more of our time. Many customers were impatient if we didn't call back quickly, leading to them sending emails we would then also have to respond to, adding more time to these inquiries. I counted the emails and wrote how much time each inquiry took. This was tricky because often these inquiries would involve info needed from the warehouse, so I'd have to include that correspondence into each entry as well. Another fun thing about our job, we had to have all orders entered by 5 p.m. exactly for transmission to the offsite warehouse, or else they would be delayed a day. We promised next day delivery, so delivery days often meant an angry call from a customer the next day when their package doesn't arrive, and a 10-minute call the account manager has to be on to calm them down and offer discounts for goodwill. We were so delayed by our rigorous accounting of our time that we missed about 10% of the orders getting entered by cutoff. We often were right down to the wire with order entry, as it was before this ridiculous policy. Any delay was trouble. Payments also weren't being processed every day, as we simply didn't have time to get to them, messing up things for accounting when they needed to prepare the weekly statements. Non-urgent inquiries were put off to the next day, or even 2 to 3 days. Custom price quotes weren't even looked at. After 5 days of this nonsense, the account managers, whose numbers were now declining due to all the fires they were putting out, and who were frustrated by their customers' complaints that they couldn't get through by phone like they used to, conceded that they were fine keeping things the way they were, and management, in its infinite wisdom, allowed us to stop the time accounting. The new manager lasted only 3 more weeks. Well, OP, I think you need to take this malicious compliance a little bit further. You need another person, and make that clear to them by only working the hours you're supposed to work and really letting things fall behind. Maybe then they'll realize just how understaffed you are, or maybe they won't, but at least you tried. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Dungeon Monster. Albatross is the best bird ever. Let's jump right in. Hey peeps, first time, hope it's acceptable as malicious compliance. This was way back in primary school. I was in 5th grade and was very book nerdy. My parents were book nerds themselves. The holy book in our house was The Lord of the Rings. I, of course, read that with a little help. The Hobbit and all the Harry Potter books that came out by then. For my present on my 9th birthday, my parents bought me a biology and sciences encyclopedia, which was a series of not that heavy, yet not that childish. The drawings were pretty detailed and gruesome, books on various different subjects. I was encouraged to continue my book reading during classes by most teachers, as the principal herself was very pro self-teaching and all that. There was one teacher though, I'll call her Rita, that hated me for ignoring her class and reading, even though I was allowed. I was always getting grades in the high 90s, so she really couldn't do much. The thing is, I loved her class, as she was teaching about sciences, which was my favorite subject. Never bothered her class, always answered her pop-up questions, meant to throw me off with respect, and was correct most of the time. I was seeing that as a challenge, and she even received praises from my parents to the principal for challenging me so. On the end of 5th grade, we received a project to conduct a study on our favorite animal and show it to the class. Now, this being primary school, you'd probably expect dogs, horses, cats, maybe something from a zoo like a lion or a tiger. Me, being the book nerdy type, looked up interesting animals on my encyclopedia and found the albatross. With a wingspan of 3.7 meters, 12 feet for my Western friends, it was majestic in its pictures, describing its aerodynamics and habitats. So that's what I wrote about. When it was time to talk about our projects, I went up and started in my well-rehearsed, trying to be serious and adult voice to introduce the albatross, the bird with the longest wingspan in the world. Not one sentence after, Rita cuts me and declares, "Sit down, kid, there's no such animal, and clearly you haven't prepared at all. It's a 0 for you, and learn to study instead of reading your fantasy books." I was shocked. Never in my, albeit short life, was I humiliated like that. I answered without thinking, "What? No, you're wrong. The albatross is a real bird." "Oh, you think you know more than your teacher? Fine then, Mr. Know-It-All. Show us proof." "It's in my book at home." Rita, being smug, "Of course it is. Know what? Why don't you come tomorrow with your little book and show all of us how stupid you are?" At this point, I was crying, and most of the kids were laughing at me. I don't blame them. It's freaking primary school, and a kid is being humiliated in front of everyone. I might have laughed, was it someone else? I couldn't stay in class and ran home from school. It was right on the other side of the road, and back then, kids above 9 were not uncommon crossing roads by themselves. My parents were called and rushed home from work, worrying, just to find me crying and hugging my dog, Nala, and holding my biology encyclopedia. After calming me down and promising me I wasn't in trouble for running home from school, they heard my story and immediately called the principal and told her everything. Of course, she heard a very different story from Rita, but she agreed with my parents that it was highly unusual for an 11-year-old book nerd with high grades and no problems with behavior to run away from school. So she made an agreement with me and my parents. If she wants you to prove her wrong in front of everyone, that's what she'll get. The day after, I was entering class sheepishly with my book as a shield to hide my face behind. Before class started, there was an announcement that called all kids and staff to the central courtyard for a lecture. This was not that unusual, but no one expected that at 8 a.m. Most of the time, it was called during or right after lunch break. We went out and there was my principal, the janitor with a mic and amp, and Miss Rita herself smiling daggers at me. Behind them was a black tarp-covered stand, important later. As everyone settled down, the principal called, "OP, can you please come up? Everyone, this is OP from Class E2, and he has a very special animal to talk about." Some polite clapping, and the principal hands me the mic. I start giving my lecture, doing my best to keep my voice steady, and as I do so, the principal stops me. Principal, taking out a different mic, "Wait a second, OP. I think some people here don't know that albatrosses are real. Do you have any proof?" "Yes, ma'am. I brought the book like Mrs. Rita asked me to." "Well, that's good and all, but not every book is considered factual. What kind of book have you brought?" "An encyclopedia about biology," showing the book to everyone. "Wow, that's a very good book to have. But OP, I think some people, maybe even our Miss Rita here, can't see your book from that far. How about we show them a picture?" At this point, both the principal and the janitor pulled on the tarp, revealing a large picture, hastily plastered to a board, of the albatross. This was rewarded with claps and oohs from the crowd, though I felt mine was the loudest. Principal smiled at me. "How about this, OP? I know you'd love to tell everyone about your bird. Would you like to write on this board and we'll place it in your class?" I smiled back and nodded yes enthusiastically. I never saw Miss Rita after that year. P.S. Years later, my parents filled me in on their side of the story and told me that the principal ordered Rita to apologize to my parents and to personally print and post the picture on the board, or she would be fired. I imagine the hours she had wasted looking it up. That was way before Wikipedia, getting a photo of the albatross and making that sign. Always cheers me up. Okay, is anybody else wondering why a science teacher wouldn't know what an albatross is? I mean, come on. Mind you, that might tell you something about the school system where OP's from. Our next story today comes to us from Dervrak. Not one single thing out. Let's jump right in. I did a work-study job for the chemistry biology department in college. Most of the professors were pretty nice, but I had this one that was a huge douchebag. He insisted that not one thing in the lab be out of place when he started his lecture and would throw a huge tantrum if anything had been. The problem was, sometimes there was only 15 minutes between the end of another professor's course and the start of his. So I had to rush around cleaning tables and putting everything in just the right place, and sometimes it just wasn't possible if they had done a big lab project that day. So he would call me out and give me a huge chewing out in front of the entire class if one lab tray was still out or the tables hadn't been completely cleaned off. One day he screamed, "I don't want to see one single thing out when I start my lecture." So in a case of malicious compliance, I followed his rules to the letter. He had this huge binder he carried around with all his lecture notes, hundreds and hundreds of pages. All his handwritten notes from his years of teaching. He treated that thing like the Holy Grail, always had it in his hands everywhere he went. So one day at the end of a lecture, he had a staff meeting he had to run to, so he sets his precious binder down on the lecture podium and forgets it. Oh, not one single thing can be left out in the room at the end of a lecture, remember? So I took his precious lecture binder and filed it away in the most obscure, out-of-the-way place in the entire lab. Basically, on the bottom of a pile of other books in the very back corner of an unused portion of the equipment storage room, and stacked a bunch of boxes in front of it for good measure. When he realized it was missing, he went into a complete meltdown. The second I walked in the next day, he ran up and said, "Did you see my binder yesterday?" I said, "Binder? Yeah, I think I saw it when you were giving your lecture yesterday." So technically not a lie. Eventually he did locate it, but it was months later when he had already had to try and recreate many pages of his notes by hand. But I still get a chuckle out of it to this day. There's a couple of different ways this malicious compliance could have been done. One of them would be to leave a bunch of things out because you were told not to leave a single thing out. Another option would be to just move the lectern an inch to the left every time you have to clean up the room, just to see if they'll notice, and eventually they'll be on the other side of the room. Our last story today comes to us from Teflon Jacket. All time must be accounted for. Let's jump right in. Several years ago, I worked for a professional services company which handled IT projects for large companies and governments. It was a multinational with many layers of management that all tried to justify their existence. We would typically be officially assigned to 1 or 2 projects only, depending on the employee's skill set, but the reality was it would usually be more than that, and you would get various requests from people for help on one-off items. We were paid a fixed salary with no paid overtime. Our time was billed to clients according to the percentage of our time officially allocated to them. Then an email was received from HR saying that instead of logging our 8 hours per day split between the assigned projects, we needed to document every activity that took 20 minutes or more to its own P code. A P code was specific to a project task and needed to be created and assigned to a project. If no P code was supplied, do not work on the request. This didn't go down well with the projects or support staff. Anytime developers were asked for help, we had to reply asking for a P code. Sometimes the project had one available, other times the project manager would have to request one was created. Sometimes a P code couldn't be added to a project because it wasn't budgeted for. The first issue to arise was that work wasn't being done because P codes weren't available. Deadlines were being missed and issues were happening on production applications because easy fixes couldn't be worked on. HR insisted this wasn't their fault and the P code process must be followed. Then developers noticed that they were spending more than 20 minutes filling in time cards and chasing projects for P codes. As this process must be followed, we asked HR for a P code to log our time spent tracking work and assigning to P codes. Their first response was we didn't need one, but we pointed out the policy was that all tasks over 20 minutes must be tracked with a P code. We were sometimes spending longer getting codes than we were on the actual work. Begrudgingly, they issued a P code for this process. Fast forward to the end of the quarter, and the executive team is reviewing the productivity. Things don't look good. Lots of projects are delayed, support incident numbers are rising, and there is a very large amount of time assigned to a P code which isn't chargeable to a customer. There is a swift investigation followed by an email from HR. P codes are no longer needed. Just log your time based on your allocation to a project. Ah yes, a classic example of manglement instead of management. I do, however, understand that sometimes you need to try new things that you think might make the process better, but as soon as you find out that it's screwing things up, you need to get rid of it and go back to how things were. Check out all 4 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.